President Trump is blaming the Antifa movement for much of the violence we're seeing during these protests across the country. But we are now learning that online calls for action, calls for violence attributed to Antifa, are in fact coming from elsewhere. And the president's family buying into this online deceit. Let's bring in CNN's Donnie O'Sullivan. Donnie, walk us through what's happening here.
That's right, John. On Sunday, the president went as far as saying he would label Antifa a terrorist organization. Now, with that in mind, a tweet began circulating on Sunday evening into Sunday night, and I think we can bring it up on screen. It came from an account that said they were Antifa America, and it said, "Alert, tonight's the night, comrades. Tonight we say F the city and we move into residential areas, the white hoods, and we take what's ours." Now that is obviously a clear call to violence, but we have learned since over the past 24 hours, Twitter telling us that that account was not actually run by Antifa at all. It was, in fact, actually run by white nationalists, a known white supremacist group. Now, it's important to say that, that doesn't mean that Antifa isn't involved in any violence here in any way, but what it does confirm is suspicions that white nationalists have been jumping on the Antifa movement in ways to try and stoke tension. And that tweet picked up a lot of traction. In fact, it got picked up by the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., who shared the tweet from Antifa with his 2.8 million Instagram followers, obviously believing it was real. And he said, "Absolutely insane." This was his commenting on the tweet. "Just remember what Antifa really is, a terrorist organization. They're not even pretending anymore." Now, when we reached out for comment, there was no comment from Trump Jr. He has removed that post from his Instagram this morning, and there is obviously no suggestion whatsoever that he knew who was behind this. Like all of us, he probably fell for some online misinformation here. So it's very important, I think, that we all know, as we see posts from all sides of the political spectrum across all social media platforms, to be very critical of what you're looking at, and things may not be what they seem.
Things may not be what they seem. It's not the first time the president's son has either retweeted or reposted or commented on something that turned out to be not what it appeared to be. Donnie O'Sullivan, appreciate that very much. Important reporting. Thank you, sir. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo saying what's happening in his state is inexcusable. Looting and violence resulting in more than 700 arrests last night. CNN's Shimon Prokopets joins us from New York. Shimon, you see the pictures of the destruction, and it is startling.
It is startling, John, and I was out there witnessing a lot of the destruction, and it was hard to watch what was going on. You had looters that completely took over the city. The city was overrun by looters that seemingly were operating in an organized fashion on their own. Police officers were chasing them all around. Of course, the governor very critical today of the way the city responded to all of this. And having seen what I saw last night, I was out there till 2 in the morning, you can't blame him. Take a listen to what he said.
The police must stop the looting and the criminal activity. They are supposed to protect the community, protect the property. They did not do that in New York City last night. And I am disappointed and outraged at what happened in New York City last night.
And as are many police officers, obviously, John. I've been talking to some police officers here at the NYPD. They're tired. They're, in some ways, overwhelmed now, and they're wondering how this is going to stop. They're asking, police officers that I've talked to, that more resources be brought in. They're not happy. They were running around the entire island of Manhattan trying to stop these looters for hours. This went on for several hours. It started around 7 o'clock in the evening on 5th Avenue. I saw a store there being broken into, looters trashing, shattering glass, then running away, the police trying to chase them down. They ran to the Upper East Side. Then there were people around Union Square who were doing the same, using metal barricades that police had placed on the street to help with some of the peaceful demonstrators. They used these metal barriers to shatter glass through stores, and they would run into the store. And the other thing is, police were standing around. They were maybe a few blocks away. The thing is, for a lot of these officers, there is some fear, of course, because if you go into one of these situations, you could be overwhelmed by these looters, and in some cases they were. And you heard officers calling for assistance all night across the city to try and get this under control, and they just couldn't get it under control. The other thing I saw people, after the curfew had ended at 11 p.m., there were looters walking around the streets with bats, metal bats. Why, after 11 o'clock, or why at any point, someone would need to walk around the streets of Manhattan with a metal bat? They were walking right past police officers. Police officers weren't asking any questions, weren't stopping anyone. And it just seemed, I have never witnessed anything like this before. You know, I was in Ferguson, I was in Baltimore, and of course there was looting in Ferguson. But this was a city last night that was overrun in the hundreds by looters. They were young, they were men, they were women, they were arriving in cars, they were on bicycles, on scooters, they had duffel bags. And one final point, this to me seemed like it was very organized. They knew the locations they were targeting, they knew what locations were being targeted and where they were successful, and then they were going there by the dozens and removing items and removing clothes and shoes. It was really distressing to see. And I know I've been talking to people who live in New York City, and people are scared. And they're trying to figure out how is this going to stop and what is going to happen tonight and in the coming days, John.